In today's video, I'm going to read from the book of Jasher. Is it Jasher? Is it Yasher? Somebody will let me know. And I'm going to skim through most of it, but there's some cool stuff in here. No, the book of Jasher wouldn't be in a standard Bible if you went out and bought a Bible. But I think that truth exists outside of the Bible, and just because there's a book that's not in the Bible, that doesn't mean that it's false. And this one's really interesting. It's verse 20. When we get there, it'll be on the next page. It's related to transvestigation. It's related uh, to eugenics programs, and I guess maybe more importantly, it's related to the times of Noah, which I was talking about in the previous video. And yeah, that's why I'm sharing this, because a friend reminded me of this part of this book, chapter 2. And let's get started. So I'm going to skim read through a lot of this stuff. And I guess does this book fit in, cuz this is very early. This is, I mean, it reminds me of Genesis. So would this Jasher be put after Genesis? I'm not sure, but yeah, so look, they're talking about Adam in the beginning. So I'm going to skim read through this, but there's some stuff that I'm going to talk more in depth about, or say everything. Seth lived 105 years and begat a son. So timelines were different back then, and people lived a lot longer. I have personal theories about this. I think that they had, I know that this sounds a little crazy, but I think they had like more genetic material back then. And because if you keep taking Xeroxes of things over and over, you lose quality over time. And of course, God did not make biological reproduction the same as like a Xerox, but I believe in entropy, and I think that over time more errors are going to be introduced, and that I think that what we're dealing with today is just a fraction of the robustness of the genetic material of Adam and Eve going way back. And I think that also explains why it wasn't a big deal in the beginning. People like freak out, oh man, you're like marrying your cousin. But back then, I think that even if you were cousins, you could have children that look wildly different than yourself, because just the genetic material was so much more back then. They had so much more going on, that anything that we see today is from that. So like you could have, I mean, there's instances in the Bible where twins are born and the twins are wildly different from one another. So I guess that's kind of a cool thing. And yeah, thinking about how they really did live to be like hundreds of years old. Maybe part of why our short lifespans now, well, one, God did it. Was it after the flood? He said, you guys aren't going to live that long anymore. And because, I mean, we see here that people got into craziness very quickly. And maybe I really do think that tech comes into this stuff, where technology was already out of control because the fallen angels had already come down, and people lived for such a long amount of time. How think of I mean, this gets said all the time. If that person only lived to be longer, like what music would they have written? What more inventions could have been invented? And it's interesting here. Later in this chapter, it talks about Tubal Cain, and I'm not sure if that's the same one that it gets talked about in the book of Enoch for being like so knowledgeable on all things like metal. And yeah, you had people back then that could live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Imagine how intelligent they became. It's just interesting. So I'm just skimming through this. In the days of Enosh, the sons of men continued to rebel and transgress against God. I mean, Adam and Eve are still alive at this point, and it just gets worse and worse. It seems like once once Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, that was the beginning of the end, and it's been like downhill since then. It almost seems like people were immediately just going away from God. Immediately. is one thing that I'm taking away from this. And the sons of men went and they served other gods, and they forgot the Lord who had created them in the earth. And in those days the Son of Men made images of brass and iron, wood and stone, and they bowed down and served them. It's like, how many generations in are we? Only a handful, and they're immediately building idols and bowing down to them. And every man made his god, and they bowed down to them. This still happens in India in places. In places like India, like families will have their own gods. So part of what this was reminding me of, Book of Jasher or whatever, chapter 2, how time is short. They want to tell you that history, like, oh, we had cavemen and stuff. No, the traditions that places like India still do, like families having their own gods with blue, that are all blue and sticking their tongue out and stuff, this is from this time. This is not far removed. The entire human history, I think, is short. I yes, I do agree with the young Earth people. Like Earth could just be total history could just be like 8,000 years. That could be real. I do believe in that. That time really is short and that they tell us outrageous lies about history. And of course the caveman thing is a lie. And yeah, anyways. This was interesting. It's like there was a mini flood before the big flood. If the book, so some people aren't going to believe things that aren't in the Bible, and I think that you should just use discernment. And to me, this chapter reads, I I believe it seems believable. So I don't know. You could gauge your level of belief or change it for yourself, how much you believe this stuff. Um, I guess it's just I read stuff like this and I'm like, this sounds right. If I found out that this is exactly what happened, I wouldn't be surprised. Anyways, and the Lord caused the waters of the river Gihon to overwhelm him. Is that one of the rivers that's mentioned in Genesis? Like, when Adam and Eve are in the garden, and maybe it's right after they're taken out of the garden, when is it God is describing like over here the land's rich in gold, and there's this river, and is that one of the rivers mentioned in that? So this could be another thing just coming to mind. This could be Pangea times that are talked about right here, where Earth is mostly just one mass at this point, and we have this river. Okay, and the Lord caused the waters of the river to overwhelm them, and he destroyed and consumed them, and he destroyed the third part of the earth. So one river overflowing destroyed a third part of the earth. I believe that this is Pangea times. Yeah, I don't think it's coincidence that the continents fit together like puzzle pieces. And the Bible mentions like times where the earth is greatly shaking. I think, yeah, California maybe did used to be an island. Who knows? Stuff like that. Plate tectonics is real to a certain extent, but we don't live on a ball. Man, it's one of those things that gets lost forever, but I know it was real. I was doing research with a friend. This was years ago, and it was it was when I made a video about hot springs. I could time it if I wanted to go back. I don't know. Anyways, I found this image that it like had a map of the earth, and it had the tectonic plates that they talk about, and then they had gears underneath it. And I guess because it had something to do with the way that the tectonic plates shifted with one another, could be thought of as like these gears underneath. And it like blew my mind. I saw that image and I was like, whoa, this could be like reality, that that there's some crazy gear systems involved. And I don't know. Who knows if it really is, but it was a cool image. I'm just rambling now. Uh, but this is interesting, a mini flood. In those days, there was neither sowing nor reaping in the earth. And so here, and there was a massive famine. And there was no food for the sons of men, and the famine was very great in those days. This is an interesting curse in verse 8. And the seed which they sowed in those days in the ground became thorns, thistles, and briars. For from the days of Adam was this declaration concerning the earth, of the curse of God, which he cursed the earth on account of the sin which Adam sinned before the Lord. I find this very interesting that it doesn't get blamed on Eve. A lot of people like to blame everything on Eve and pretend like that's it honestly gets used in a misogynistic way all the time. Like, well, Eve is the one that gets deceived by Satan, and I think if Satan wanted to deceive Adam, he could have deceived Adam just as easily. That I mean, Adam went along with it, and in my opinion, you're no better for just going along with something that you know is wrong. I don't think anyone, in my opinion, it's like a good lesson of you're no better off if you just go along with something that you know is wrong because somebody eggs you on. You're no better off than the person who who initiated it. I think that's kind of the lesson there. But anyways, um, men continued to rebel. Interesting. Yeah, people are waiting like 90 years. Was time moving more quickly? Were years flying by, or was society just in such a way where people were living to 90 years old? Did people age really slowly back then? Did you stay like childlike until you're 20? I don't know. I'm just posing questions. So this was very interesting. And Enosh lived 90 years and begot Canaan. And Canaan grew up and he was 40 years old and he became wise and had no. So probably you didn't stay infantile really because he was already very wise at the age of 40. So Canaan grew up and he was 40 years old and became wise and had knowledge and skill in all wisdom. And he reigned over all the sons of men. And he led the sons of men to wisdom and knowledge. For Canaan was a very wise man and had understanding in all wisdom. Okay, a lot of emphasis on the wisdom. And with his wisdom, he ruled over spirits and demons. That's very interesting to me and makes me think of all the sigils and how, like, even Solomon is thought of, or I don't know, you hear about sigils and Solomon being connected and Solomon's wisdom and like Solomon being so incredibly wise. This guy seems like a Solomon type figure to me. And so the connectedness with the demon things, like what is going on? Does that mean that he knew how to draw crazy sigils and like summon a demon and encase it in a crystal or something? What does this mean exactly? He ruled over spirits and demons. And it doesn't necessarily seem like a positive thing, like a good thing. Stuff like this is very interesting because yeah, whenever I think of a figure like Solomon, I don't think of them as this like shining beacon of righteousness. I almost think of them as somebody who almost knows too much. It's like they know the good and evil. I mean, the whole thing of the knowledge of the fruit in the garden, the to know good and evil. Just interesting ideas here that yeah, like this guy's super wise, but doesn't necessarily seem pure. He's dealing with spirits and demons, so very interesting to me. And Canaan knew by his wisdom that God would destroy the sons of men for having sinned upon earth, and that the Lord would in the latter days bring upon the waters of the flood. This was interesting, like a pre Moses writing on tables of stone thing. And in those days Canaan wrote upon tablets of stone what was to take place in time to come, and he put them in his treasures. And Canaan reigned over the whole earth and turned some of the sons of men to the service of God. So Zillah, her sister. So verse 18 actually becomes relevant. So I'm going to start reading from verse 18 because this is relevant. And she again conceived and bare a son and called his name Jubal. And Zillah, her sister, was barren in those days and had no offspring. That becomes very relevant. For in those days the sons of men began to trespass against God and to transgress the commandments which he had commanded to Adam, to be fruitful and multiply in the earth. So yeah, that was a commandment. Things like this just reminds me of how God doesn't change. God gave Adam commandments when he left the garden to have dominion, and that the curse that he was going to have to toil the land, and he gave Adam and Eve commandments to be fruitful and multiply. Just like the 10 Commandments. And then Jesus also gave us commandments. And some of the sons of men caused their wives to drink a draught that would render them barren, in order that they might retain their figures, and whereby their beautiful appearance might not fade. Things like this, it's just you read it and you know that's true. At least in my opinion. It's just something, the way that to me this seems true is because it just seems so believable that this would happen. That somebody would say, "Hey, I have this potion," and man, there's just so many layers going on here. It's like the pedo undertones of the Satanists. Satanists are often pedophiles, like the whole you know what gate and Harvey Weinstein-esque revelations that people are learning about. Except, I mean, more, I'm saying more in the pizza direction, that not only are these people sex offenders, they're often pedophiles. And this is very pedo to me. The fact that they're trying to keep women in a premature state, to me, is very, very much something a pedophile would be interested in. And pressure from the men making it's like they made their wives to do it. And some of the sons of men caused their wives to drink a draught that would render them barren, in order in order that they might retain their figures, and whereby their beautiful appearance might not fade. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading. Here, whenever something's repeated, I think it's very important. And when the sons of men caused some of their wives, they're very much putting the emphasis on the husbands in this scenario. This doesn't sound like it was the women's idea at all in this case. Except for Zyla, they make you know that she decided to. So when some of the men caused some of their wives to drink, Zyla drank with them, and the childbearing women appeared abominable in the sight of their husbands as widows, whilst their husbands lived, for to the barren ones only they were attached. So basically, this was a turning point historically, and in my opinion, this seems like a Pangea situation, and one king or one wise person, I don't know, what did they consider them? It's in this time it almost seems like they just collectively decided as a group, like, you are the most wise, you're going to be ruling over us. That's what it seems. I don't know what the status was of going back to the most wise 40-year-old guy. But it seems like the entire society just had come to this point where women are only really desirable if they take this potion that renders them infertile, and women that actually give birth are demoted, they're widowed basically. Once you're a woman that doesn't decide to take this potion and you're actually having offspring, they really were just treated as breeding grounds at this point. I think it's really clear the way that this makes it seem like a societal thing. All the men had decided we're gonna have these sex object. I mean, it really to me comes off as being in a pedophile way, because the women are not like a mature woman, like a woman who's given birth. Okay, so anyways, I'm just gonna keep reading. And in the end of days and years, when Zyla became old, the Lord opened her womb. So they lived their entire life. To me, this shows you that it's something stronger than just, you're not taking birth control. I think they had to drink one thing, and it rendered them, it stunted them basically, drinking this one thing this one time. And yeah, I think that people just don't think that it's possible because it was back in the days. But I mean, these people were around for hundreds and hundreds of years. They lived for very long periods of time, and fallen angels were running amok. And even today, it's one of those weird things, when people are like, "Oh, it's all natural." Well, what? nothing exists that isn't natural because it all had to be created at some point by God. We can manipulate things and we can do some alchemical things, but at the end of the day, literally everything in existence is natural because God had to make it at some point. And you're manipulating real matter to make something else. And I mean, I guess my point is I don't know. The potion could have been grab this herb, grab that plant, grab this and mix it together, or it could be a pill that a company is sending out. I don't know. Those types of details. It's interesting that yeah, they're missing, but would you think to write it down? These things, how did these stories get passed down? I mean, who wrote it? At this point, just a lot of stuff is going to be lost to time because you're only telling the most important parts, I think. But yeah, it just comes. This could have been like an injection that some company's shelling out. Hey guys, come get your wife to come take this thing. I don't know. Uh, there. I think I mostly I'll kind of skim through the rest of the stuff, but this is what I wanted to share just because somebody said it and in my comments, a friend, and it's really cool. I believe it's true that there was this huge push where basically everybody had their wife that they gave this potion, and any woman that was used for breeding was you're basically I mean they said that they're widowed, right? So it's you're not even married to the guy basically. They're literally just using you as breeding ground to breed. That's it. Really scary. How things end. I mean, another thing that just keeps going on is how quickly things went south. Like, this is very early on in history, and things are already getting that bad. It's incredible. So, Cain gets killed. This stuff's interesting to me because the details of didn't Cain, because some of these details seem to match, where didn't Cain have a mark on him? And here it's interesting because Cain is so cursed at this point that he's easily mistaken for a beast. But also, didn't Cain have a mark and nobody was supposed to kill Cain? So here's an interesting story where Lamech was very old and he couldn't really see, and they were out in a field, and Tubal Cain, his son, was yet very young. Tubal Cain told his father to draw a bow, and with that he smote Cain, who was yet far off. Oh man, he was a good shot, I guess, even for having dim eyes. He appeared to be an animal. So, what wasn't Cain cursed where nobody could kill him? But I could see the scenario. This kind of thing makes sense where because Lamech didn't know that it was Cain, that God would spare him the curse that because anybody who killed Cain weren't they supposed to become super cursed or something? Anyways, maybe somebody can fill me in, refresh my memory in the comments. But it seems like this is the fulfillment. This is finally when it all ended. Cain's punishment for killing Abel. Verse 29. I'm just skim reading through this stuff. Verse 31 is kind of interesting. And Lamech was very much grieved at having done this, and in clapping his hands together, he struck his son and caused his death. And then his wives revolt against him, and then the wives finally listen to his story and they come back to him, but they never sleep with him again. I'm paraphrasing. But at the very end here, and Malalel, the son of Canaan, lived 65 years and he begat Jared, and Jared lived 62 years and he begat Enoch. So this is pre-Enoch. So very early on in history, things immediately go downhill. Where does Babel, the Tower of Babel, fit into this? Because yeah, I think that was probably Pangea times, and I think that fits in here somewhere. I don't know. That's in Genesis, right? So this book seems to be parallel to Genesis. Is that right? Maybe someone in the comments will. I mean, I guess because Genesis definitely gets to the flood, so this is pre-flood. So this fits in the timeline of Genesis. It's, but I don't know how the rest of this Apocrypha goes. That is it for this video. I mean, I did have this, that, the brief account of Enoch. So this, I just wanted to give some timelines because yeah, I've been talking about the flood. Okay, Jesus tells us that in the end, it's going to be like the times of Noah. So I was trying to figure out, well, what are the days of Noah like? And so here in the book of Jasher, it tells us that this is kind of what was happening in the society around this time, 69 years before Noah's birth, plus some extra years, whatever, from Enoch to the specific people that I just read about. And so, yeah, that I think that's what was going on in Noah's time. Most men had women that were taking potions to keep them young, and natural women that were actually deciding to reproduce were not even considered married to their husband, basically. And that's how bad things were. And of course, so that's just one specific instance. That it's interesting. That's like one specific thing of this is how bad things were. So you can only imagine the things that don't get mentioned, because people don't think of mentioning everything. Sometimes you only think of one thing at a time, or a big thing, when there's thousands of other things just like this going on. If it's this bad, you can only imagine. Well, thank you for the friend for reminding me of this. Let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Hope you enjoyed. God bless everyone.